You have probably found yourself scrolling through Zillow or Rightmove late at night, looking at a house that is falling apart, smells like damp, and hasn't been updated since the 1970s. Yet it is listed for a price that makes you want to throw your phone across the room. You look at that price tag and you ask yourself a very simple, terrifying question. Who is buying this? And more importantly, is everyone else crazy? Or am I the one who doesn't understand how money works? The standard answer you get from the news is boring. They talk about supply and demand, they talk about interest rates, and they talk about zoning laws. But that is a lie. Well, it is not a lie, but it is the boring, sanitized version of the truth. The real reason housing bubbles happen is much darker, much more human, and frankly, much more terrifying. It is a story about a specific glitch in the human brain, a glitch that has destroyed empires, bankrupt entire generations, and left millions of people homeless. And the scariest part is that we keep doing it over and over again in the exact same way. To understand why we destroy our own economy every 15 years or so, you have to unlearn everything you learned in Economics 101. Standard economics assumes that you are a rational person. It assumes that if a house is worth $100,000 based on the rent it can generate, you will pay $100,000 for it. But you are not a calculator. You are a social animal who is terrified of being left behind. History shows us that when it comes to housing, which is this weird mix of a place to sleep and a retirement account, we lose our minds. We fall into what creates the most dangerous financial event in human history, something the economist Hyman Minsky spent his life studying. He realized that stability is actually dangerous. When things are calm, when you have a job, and your neighbor has a job, and the bank feels safe, we start to get cocky. We start to take risks we shouldn't take. It always starts with the displacement. This is the moment the music changes at the party. It's an external shock that looks like a golden opportunity. In the 1920s, it was the invention of the car and the railroad reaching Florida. Suddenly, regular people in freezing New York could get to paradise in a day. In the 2000s, it was the Federal Reserve slashing interest rates to historic lows. This displacement creates a logical reason to buy. The early investors make money and they make a lot of it. This is the dangerous part because their success validates the idea. You see your friend buy a condo and sell it a year later for double what he paid. Suddenly, working your 9-to-5 job feels stupid. Why work for $50,000 a year when your house can earn that in 6 months just by sitting there? This is the psychological poison that fuels the fire. This brings us to the euphoria phase, or as I like to call it, the greater fool phase. This is when the asset, the house, stops mattering. No one cares about the roof quality or the school district. They only care about the price movement. We saw this in the wildest way possible during the Florida land boom of the 1920s. This is a story most people forget, but it is the blueprint for everything bad that happens in real estate. In 1925, Florida wasn't just a market, it was a hallucination. There was a group of people called the Binder Boys. These weren't real estate moguls. They were college kids, hustlers, and waiters who stood on the curbs of Miami sweating in cheap suits. They bought and sold binders, which were just pieces of paper that gave you the right to buy land in 30 days. These binders would change hands 6 or 7 times in a single day. A guy would buy a binder for a lot at breakfast for $1,000 and sell it at lunch for $2,000. The person buying it didn't want the land. They had no intention of building a house. They just wanted to sell the paper to the next guy before dinner. It was pure, distilled speculation. But here is the catch that broke people. The music always stops. In Florida, it wasn't a bank crash that started it, it was a logistical nightmare. The railroads got so clogged with building materials that they declared an embargo. They stopped shipping bricks and lumber. Suddenly, you couldn't build. Then, a massive hurricane slammed into Miami in 1920. The narrative that Florida is paradise was shattered by the reality of 150-mile-per-hour winds. The Binder Boys were wiped out instantly. The paper they were holding was worthless because no one wanted the swamp underneath it. But why does housing crash so much harder than the stock market? If you buy Bitcoin and it goes to zero, you lose your money. That hurts. But housing is different because of one specific word: leverage. Leverage is a financial magnifying glass. If you put down 5% on a house and the house price goes up 10%, you didn't make 10%. You tripled your money. It feels like magic. It feels like you are a genius. But this magnifying glass works both ways, and it burns you alive on the way down. If you put down 5% and the house drops 5%, you have lost 100% of your money. If it drops 10%, you are bankrupt. You owe more than you own. This is what happened in Japan in the 1980s, which is the single greatest example of asset insanity in human history. We think our housing prices are high today, but the Japanese bubble of the 1980s makes us look like we are shopping at a dollar store. In 1989, the land under the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, just that one square of land, was valued higher than all the real estate in the entire state of California combined. Think about that. One palace versus the entire coastline, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego. It was mathematically impossible, but the Japanese banks kept lending. They had something called intergenerational loans. These were mortgages with terms of 100 years. The logic was that you would never pay it off. Your children would never pay it off. Your grandchildren would finish paying for the small apartment you bought. It detached the price of a home from the ability of a human being to pay for it. When that bubble burst in 1991, prices didn't just correct, they fell for 15 straight years. It wasn't a dip, it was a generational depression that they call the lost decades. Then we have 2008. The crisis that we all think we understand, but we usually get the mechanics wrong. We blame poor people for borrowing money, but the real villains were in the back office of Wall Street banks making sausages. In the old days, if a bank lent you money and you didn't pay, the bank lost money. They cared if you could pay. In the 2000s, they invented securitization. The bank would lend you money, then immediately bundle your loan with thousands of others into a bond and sell it to a pension fund in Norway. The bank didn't care if you paid. They had already sold the risk. It's like a chef cooking a meal he knows is poisoned, but because he's serving it to a customer in a different restaurant, he keeps cooking. They took prime cuts of meat, good loans, and mixed them with toxic meat, loans to people with no income, no job, and no assets, the so-called ninja loans. They ground it all up into a sausage, slapped a AAA rating sticker on it, and sold it as a premium product. When this sausage factory exploded, it didn't just bankrupt hedge funds, it destroyed the American middle class. We treat this like a math problem, but it is a trauma event. There were people like the stripper mentioned in The Big Short, a real example, by the way, who had 5 mortgages. But there were also millions of regular families who were told by experts that housing never goes down. When the crash hit, we saw the rise of robo-signing. Banks were foreclosing on so many people that they hired low-level employees to sign eviction affidavits without reading them. They were signing thousands a day, stealing homes from people who sometimes hadn't even missed a payment, just because the paperwork was a mess. It was industrial-scale robbery masked as bureaucracy. And if you think we learned our lesson, look at China right now. While the US bubble was about demand, people wanting too many houses, the Chinese bubble is about supply. It is a government-mandated bubble. To keep their GDP numbers looking good, local governments in China encouraged developers to build entire cities where no one lived. I'm not exaggerating. There are places like Tiandicheng, which is a replica of Paris, complete with an Eiffel Tower that stood empty for years. There are estimates that China has enough empty apartments to house the entire population of France, Germany, and the UK combined. These are rotten tail buildings, skyscrapers that are half finished, where construction stopped because the developer ran out of money, but regular people are still paying the mortgage on a concrete shell they can't live in. It is a slow-motion car crash that makes the 2008 crisis look manageable. So what is the root cause? It is not interest rates. It is not regulation. It is us. It is the fact that we cannot stand to see our neighbor getting rich without us. The housing bubble is the ultimate manifestation of the fear of missing out. It is a social contagion, like a virus that spreads through barbecue conversations and dinner parties. When you hear that your idiot cousin made $100,000 flipping a condo, your brain breaks. You abandon caution because you feel like you are losing the game of life. That emotion is what Wall Street monetizes. They build financial products to feed that envy, to give you the leverage to chase that high, until the moment the gravity of reality sets in. But the weirdest part of housing history isn't the trillions of dollars lost. It is the bizarre little details that signal the top. If you want to know when the next crash is coming, don't look at the Federal Reserve. Look at the weird stuff. Look for the anomalies. Because history has a funny way of leaving Easter eggs before it destroys the economy. If you finally feel like you understand this invisible force that shapes so much of our lives, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives that make sense of our crazy, complicated world. Thanks for watching. Stay curious.